Europe is teetering on the brink of an unprecedented gas crisis, a looming disaster threatening the continent's very energy security, and Ukraine is at the heart of it. In a reckless move, Ukraine has decided to block vital Russian gas transit routes, severing lifelines to several European nations and plunging the continent into chaos. The fallout from this decision is already catastrophic. Soaring energy prices, economic turmoil, and a deepening crisis that could fracture the European Union itself. Ukraine's abrupt closure of two crucial gas routes, Sudzha and Sukharnovka, has thrown Europe's energy market into disarray. These pipelines are essential for the flow of Russian gas, and now Ukraine claims it must shut them down because Russian forces allegedly control certain regions. This act of defiance against Russia has not only plunged Ukraine deeper into economic hardship, but has unleashed a tidal wave of panic across Europe. Countries heavily reliant on Russian gas are now facing skyrocketing prices and crippling shortages. Ukrainian leaders argue this is a necessary sacrifice in the war with Russia. Yet, the reality is far worse. Energy prices have rocketed to nearly $500 per 1,000 cubic meters, and Ukraine has stubbornly refused to honor existing transit contracts with Russia, pushing Europe to the brink of disaster. Now, European nations are scrambling for alternatives, but the damage is done. The rift caused by Ukraine's reckless decision is widening, threatening to tear apart the fragile unity of the European Union. Amid this chaos, Russian President Vladimir Putin has intervened, seeking a solution, but also expressing his growing frustration at Ukraine's dangerous gamble. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, who visited Moscow last weekend, has openly criticized Ukraine's actions. He offered Slovakia as a neutral platform for peace talks, a step he believes could bring much-needed stability. But Ukraine's obstinate stance risks making that impossible. Putin, speaking candidly, reiterated Russia's commitment to maintaining gas supplies to Europe, despite Ukraine's provocations. He pointed to the Yamal-Europe pipeline through Poland as a viable route, emphasizing that Russia has never refused to fulfill its energy obligations. According to Putin, gas flows through Poland could easily be resumed, yet Ukraine's obstinance is making a simple solution far more complicated than it needs to be.
Regarding agreements in the energy sector, we have always supported supplies and the depoliticization of economic matters. We have never refused to supply Europe. Have we refused? I've said it 1,000 times, I can repeat it. Poland closed the route through its territory. There is an active route. No one has disrupted it. There have been no explosions. It's functioning. All they need to do is press a button, and it will start flowing through Poland. It's called Yamal-Europe, and it runs directly through Poland. Please turn it on tomorrow, and we will supply.
Putin's frustration is palpable. He lambasted Ukraine for unilaterally severing vital transit routes, accusing Kyiv of breaching contracts and disrupting the energy stability of Europe.
Everything was functioning fine. Then, for some reason, someone in Kyiv decided that they should close it. They closed it under the pretext that Russian forces controlled it. But 6 months ago, what were you thinking? It was working fine. There must have been other reasons, but I don't understand what they were. Now, Sudzha, fighting is taking place there, and it is effectively under Ukrainian control, but we continue to supply 14 million cubic meters per day. Understand? Nevertheless, despite the fact that they control Sudzha now, they announced that they will not extend the transit contract. We didn't say we were stopping. They announced they wouldn't renew the contract. If they won't, then fine. They are biting the hand that feeds them, as I've said before, because Ukraine cannot fight, let alone exist, without European support.
Putin acknowledged Slovakia's proposal for peace talks, but made it clear, any resolution requires Ukraine to reverse its reckless course, which has endangered the entire continent's energy future.
Yes, indeed, he said that if the negotiations are about a peaceful settlement, and I want to emphasize that Mr. Fico, I don't know, may have some disputes with the current Ukrainian leadership or with others in the European Union, where they don't always seem to understand each other, but he primarily spoke about a peaceful resolution to the Ukrainian issue. He has been advocating for this, pushing for it, and supporting it. So I don't know what kind of complaints might come from Europe or anyone else, but that was his focus, and that's what he concentrated on. The second point regarding the location of the talks, yes, he said that if the negotiations proceed, they would be happy to offer his country as a platform for the negotiations. We're not opposed to it if it comes to that. Why not? Because Slovakia holds a neutral position, and from our perspective, this position is neutral and acceptable to us.
The political ramifications are already severe. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has been outspoken in his criticism, calling Ukraine's actions absurd and warning of disastrous consequences for Slovakia's economy and Europe's energy security.
I'm surprised at the vehemence of the response, where he basically ruled out any notion that Ukraine could transit virtually any gas, because it's still some notion that any gas will go through Ukraine. It'll just be Russian gas. Absolutely ruled it out, and came up with suggestions that I find absurd. For example, that he'll only agree to it if we don't pay until the end of the war. He'll give you gas for free.
Fico accused Ukraine of prioritizing political posturing over the well-being of Europe. He condemned their decision to cut off gas supplies as a short-sighted move that is only benefiting Russia's geopolitical interests, while undermining the EU's energy stability.
If we are helping Ukraine, I would expect Ukraine to help us. If he decided he didn't exist because, God forbid, someone should get money for their own gas, but they're going to sell that gas somewhere else anyway. So we have to wonder why it has to be one-way traffic only. Why it has to come only from us there. Why can't there be some show of solidarity also towards us?
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has retaliated, accusing Fico of striking deals with Putin behind closed doors and warning that Slovakia's stance jeopardizes European unity.
There have been many questions from journalists today about Fico's trip to Moscow. In fact, after our conversation in Brussels in the presence of all European leaders, nothing surprises me anymore. We are fighting for lives. Fico is fighting for money, and hardly for Slovakia's money. Shadow agreements with Putin are either a trade of state interests or working for personal gain.
Meanwhile, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has also come under fire from Ukraine for his more pragmatic approach to Russia. Orbán suggests that by the time the gas enters Ukrainian territory, it would already be owned by the buyer, effectively making it Hungarian gas rather than Russian gas. This approach is currently being discussed with both Russian and Ukrainian officials, and Orbán emphasized that Hungary will continue to negotiate and won't give up on finding a solution.
We want to transport energy through that area, Ukraine territory, and we are negotiating with the Russians and the Ukrainians, and we will continue to negotiate in the future. We are now trying the unimaginative trick that if by the time the gas enters Ukrainian territory, it is no longer Russian, but would already be owned by the buyer, and then what is transported through Ukrainian territory is no longer Russian gas, but Hungarian gas. But whether the Ukrainians accept it or not, whether or not the Russians will go along with this is under discussion. We will not give up of our own free will in any case.
The deepening gas crisis has exposed the chasm between European nations that seek pragmatic solutions and those like Ukraine, who seem willing to sacrifice Europe's energy stability for ideological warfare. The stakes could not be higher. As the crisis escalates, diplomacy is desperately needed. But the gulf between nations is widening. Fico and Orbán are pushing for a resolution that preserves energy security, while Ukraine clings to its hardline stance, even at the cost of European unity. In the end, the key question remains: can Slovakia's proposal for peace talks break the deadlock? Or will Ukraine's stubbornness only deepen the rift, pushing Europe into a long-term energy crisis?